such a magical time, you know. It is.
Hey everybody, we're here today with Steve Lawler. He used to be with Yamaha. What are you doing in Havasu, Steve?
Well, Jim, we're getting ready to move here. You know, I've always loved Lake Havasu. It's probably one of my favorite places in the whole world. I've been coming here for, I don't know, early 90s, I guess, for the, you know, World Finals, and just fell in love with the place. So we're going to move here permanently, my wife and me, and my daughter is going to school in Phoenix, so we're a little closer to her, you know, being here, and she likes to come out and ride skis, and anyway, just I love the place.
Right on, that's cool. So so you're out here for World Finals then, huh?
I love World Finals. They as you know, they held a race here last week.
Yeah.
Over at the Riviera. Kind of probably has some potential.
That's a good venue.
Yeah, it seems like a really nice venue. You know, there's, you know, like jet ski racing has always been very political and a lot of drama. So it didn't seem to have the success that it probably should or could have had. But who knows? You know, got to stay positive, and maybe next year it'll be a bunch better.
Right on. We picked the perfect time. It's not 110 anymore.
I know. I mean, that's the one thing about, you know, the idea of moving here. I for sure know for a fact that come summertime, I'm going to load up the old trailer and get out of here for at least a couple of months, because no matter what anybody says, and I have a lot of really dear friends that live here, they always say, oh, you get used to it, you get used to it. I don't think I'm ever going to get used to it. I just don't like that kind of heat for that period of time.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, I mean, you know, obviously it's kind of the perfect place. So.
Oh yeah. Now you go from air-conditioned house to air-conditioned car.
Yeah.
To air-conditioned store.
Yeah.
So you were at Yamaha when they were doing the square nose, the original square nose Superjet.
Yeah, I was at Yamaha. I started in 1978, so that gives you some
Holy
idea
mackerel.
of how far back I go. And I was predominantly a motorcycle guy, so my passion was motorcycles. But somewhere in the mid 80s, I bought a Kawasaki 550, and at that point, like almost all the moto guys had jet skis, had stand-up jet skis, 440s, 550s. So it was like the perfect combination. You know, you had your dirt bike and you had a jet ski, and pretty much that's all you needed. So I kind of moved around inside Yamaha a little bit, and eventually I ended up going to work for this guy that was, you know, in charge of the watercraft project. So he was determined to bring watercraft to the United States with Yamaha. And the very first watercraft, the first two watercraft, was the Wave Runner 500 and the Wave Jammer.
Wave Jammer.
And so it was cool. I immediately was kind of an expert because I had a lot of jet ski experience. And so they used me for product development purposes, various other things. And the guy was amazing. In fact, his name is Dennis Stefani. He is famous because of his daughter, is Gwen Stefani.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I worked with him on a lot of different projects, including musical projects as well. So we were introducing products and using musicians to help.
Oh,
promote
yeah,
them.
because Yamaha was really big in the music industry as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's actually how they came into existence, was music first. And then they eventually got into motorcycles. But I worked in Buena Park, which was, we shared one common building, and it was musical stuff, a lot of pro audio stuff, and then motorcycles. And so actually the warehouse that I ran, that we kept all the products that were used for public relations, advertising purposes and stuff like that, was a kind of a refurbished sound room. So
okay.
There was a bunch of sound rooms around me, and like on any given day, you know, I could go see Stevie Wonder play, or Carl Palmer, or Eric Clapton. All these guys would come in and test stuff for Yamaha. Keyboard players, tons of keyboard players. Yamaha was really big in the keyboard thing. So, but yeah, anyway, so Dennis Stefani was the head of the guy that was able to lead the charge on bringing watercraft to America, or to the world, via Yamaha. And we were super close. and so he was instrumental in getting me involved. And I guess Superjet, very first model year of Superjet, I believe was 1991, but we had them in existence in 1990, and I just remember like being so excited because although it wasn't a 440 and 550, and it's funny because 440s and 550s were so famous back then. They were so like sought after, and you had all these famous racers, and you did Jet Ski World Finals and all the stuff that came with that. It was like any other brand or a vehicle that was like this, that was more stable. Wasn't as immediately as cool as like a 440 or 550. But we invested heavily. Yamaha invested heavily in like trying to do some things that would bring exposure to the Superjet. One of the things that we did was we invested in because back then the IJSBA was Kawasaki only.
Right.
So we invested in our own stand-up tour. It's called the Hot Water Tour.
Right.
And it was actually headed up by a guy named Phil Johnson, who was the head of Jet Pilot.
Oh, okay.
And Bill Stone, who was another bigwig at Jet Pilot. And Scott Watkins, who later on ended up coming to work for Yamaha.
Right.
So they were all instrumental in it. But we had some really good riders that took interest in racing the Hot Water Tour. Victor,
yeah.
McCluggage, Bonacci. Yeah, there was.
I didn't know Bonacci raced the stand-up. I know he did the sit-downs.
No, Bonacci was a great stand-up rider.
That's awesome.
Pretty much everybody that ever ended up being a great runabout rider, I think,
cut their teeth in the stand-ups.
Even Farthing, who's kind of known predominantly as being a runabout guy, can ride stand-ups really well. I think Dustin, if he had put his mind to it, like his kid is. His kid is like, I'm not riding anything but a stand-up, because I think he realizes that that's kind of the highest level of.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, but anyway, after the Hot Water Tour, I think the powers that be at the IJSBA started to realize that they were going to need to do some things, because having two competing tours wasn't exactly the best thing for the sport. So Bruce Sternstrom, who was the head of the IJSBA at the time, kind of, found a halfway decent compromise and allowed other brands to compete in IJSBA events. And with that came some additional revenue for the IJSBA, because the manufacturers participated financially. It was probably like 1992 or 3. McCluggage, who was by far the king of the hill when it came to Superjets. So to this day, I don't think especially square nose, there was never anybody that rode a square nose like Chris did. He literally was so talented, and still is. I haven't seen him in a bit, but I seen him the other night, and we were talking about some old stuff that we did. And I don't know when the first official barrel roll was completed, but we took a houseboat from here. We had a big dealer conference, and we borrowed a friend of mine's houseboat, and we drove it from here, from Havasu, all the way up to Laughlin. And McCluggage followed us with his Superjet, and this boat was putting out pretty substantial waves, you can only imagine. And he was doing like full-blown aerial barrel rolls and landing them.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it was like the stuff that he could do was tremendous. So, and then in racing, the reality of the, Kawasaki 550, 440s were very, a guy like Jeff Jacobs, obviously, probably the most talented stand-up rider ever. Certainly the winningest stand-up rider ever. He could ride one quite well, but most people really struggled. So the Superjet became popular pretty quick, because, a guy could get on one and could be pretty competitive, especially in rough water. They shined in rough water. Yeah, amazing rough water vehicle. It was like the phone started ringing off the hook. At that point, In 1993, I was appointed the race team manager responsibility. So prior to that, I was all kinds of different stuff, but I was never the race team manager. So in 1993, they said, okay, you know, you're the right guy for the job. You know, this is what we want to do, and so on and so forth. And so I ended up taking over at that time. Pretty much the only company that we were really working with hand in hand was ProTech, which was Chris's sponsor.
Okay.
And ProTech was amazing. Dallas
Right.
Baker.
Yeah, they did a lot for the Superjet.
Yeah, they were amazing for Yamaha period. Like they were the first, you know, aftermarket company that really saw a gigantic opportunity with Yamaha, because I think they realized that we were gonna, you know, we were growing, and the Kawasaki thing was already kind of, there were so many players in that arena. So and they had Chris, you know, and they had Tara as well. So
Right. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
so you have Chris and Tara, you have literally the best man, best woman. You know, Jammer, again, I don't want Jammer to be offended or anybody to be offended by some of the things I say, because truthfully, you know, record shows Jammer's the winningest rider ever.
Right, sure.
But he wasn't too keen on riding Yamahas at the time. And so, you know, Chris was our guy. I mean, they're
Right.
just period. Chris was our guy. ProTech was the company that we worked with, and you know, we had a lot of success. In 1993, we went to the World Cup back in Florida, and that was kind of the tour before the tour.
Right.
Yeah, and I think Chris, we introduced Blaster in '93 too.
Okay.
So
right.
Chris won everything, and Tara won everything.
I remember that. That
And
was
and Bomber raced runabout, so we took a Raider 701 and we worked with the Gueckis actually.
yeah.
We did the best we could within the.
That's bullet racing for those of you watching.
Yeah. So we did everything we could within the rules
Right.
to build a competitive runabout. Didn't have the greatest of success initially, for sure. Cowie at the time was building a one-off special,
That XIR.
Yeah.
I remember that.
and then Sea-Doo really had a phenomenal boat. I mean, their ski, their runabout, their 785 runabout was really good. So we were good in rough water. We were horrible in flat water.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, we just got welded in flat water. So, but we kept trying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I kept working with the board and the rules committee and whatnot to, you know, adjust some of the rules so that we could ultimately make some modifications to our boat that would allow us to be a little more competitive. That's where the Bullet guys, Gueckis, came in. We won a lot. And then '93, we went to the national tour, and Chris was amazing. Tara was amazing. And we got to world finals, and it was like all of a sudden, like I said earlier, my phone just started ringing off the hook of people, Kawasaki people, or people that were riding Kawasaki's. They weren't necessarily Kawasaki people; they were
Sure.
people that rode Kawasaki's that wanted to get a deal on a Superjet, or
Oh,
you know,
no kidding.
Yeah, but we had a limited budget, and
Sure.
really our focus, our loyalty was to ProTech.
Right.
So anyway, that year, I think it was '93, at the end of World Finals, Bill Chapin, you know, the Bill and Glenn from R&D,
Right.
who was like kind of didn't care for me much at the time, because Bill was a super competitive guy.
Oh yeah.
Loved Bill to death.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, Steve, this is Bill Chapin. I'm like, I know who you are, Bill. And he's like, he always kept everything super secret. So
Right.
he organized this super secret meeting between Jeff Jacobson and us. And I had my own Superjet, so I let Jeff ride it. And I forget where we were at. Here in Havasu, but I forget if we were at Site 6 or where we went.
One of
It was
those.
super secret.
Right.
Just Bill Chapin.
Yeah, the Bill Chapin special.
Yeah. And anyway, long story short, Jeff really liked to ski, and that next year, Riva Yamaha, who's the biggest retailers of Yamaha watercraft in the whole world, not just in the United States, but in the whole world.
Even back then?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because
wow.
they Riva did an insane number of rentals.
Okay.
And
South
the
Florida,
rental world loves
Yamahas.
always loved Yamahas
Correct.
because of their reliability.
Correct. Yeah.
And a lot of those places that Bambus's, the Riva guys sell to were saltwater.
Right.
So they were especially good in
Which is
saltwater.
where they shine.
Yeah,
exactly.
where they shine. So anyway, long story short, we ended up teaming up with Riva. So now we had ProTech and then Riva.
Wow.
And those were kind of our two big teams, you know. And Riva came with Tim Judge, who was quite an accomplished racer and builder. And they had Rob Flores, and they had a few other guys that Lloyd Berlew, who was a freestyle guy.
Right.
Riva was different than ProTech because, like, Riva sold a lot of Yamahas. It was easier for me to get money that was a little bit outside the racing budget to help Riva.
Oh, I gotcha.
Because they sold so many watercraft for Yamaha. And they're just amazing people too, by the way. They're amazing. Dave Bambus, who's always been the head of he's like literally like a brother to me.
Yeah, I met him with Chapin years ago.
Yeah.
Great, good people.
Oh, they're amazing. It was obvious that Yamaha was definitely, growing. The Superjet, Squareno Superjet was all of a sudden within 1 year like the vehicle of choice.
Right.
It was like, okay, we got to spread the wealth a little bit. So we kind of started to expand our sponsorships a little bit. So we went outside just the Riva and the ProTech. But, we had so many great riders. I just pulled out one of our old posters the other day, which was the last year that we ever had a factory team, which was 2002, I think. And 2001 or 2002, somewhere in there, 2002. And I mean, it's like literally, other than Chris,
Right.
it literally every great racer in the world was on that poster.
Right.
Rios was on there, Farthing was on there, Tara was on there. I mean, we had so many great, riders that rode for us.
Right.
And, I think like I'm sort of unique in that I was fortunate enough to be allowed to race myself. So not only was I the race team manager,
Right,
but I also raced in the expert class. So I never raced pro, I never turned pro, but I finished fourth, like I think 2 or 3 years in the expert class against all kids,
Right.
So it was, these kids were fast. The expert class back then,
Right.
class back then was like, give or take, you'd have somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 different qualifiers
Right.
to get into like whatever we had, 14-man main events.
Right.
So it took me all the way to the end of the first year that I raced, which was 94, to actually make a main event.
Wow, that's
So,
amazing. That was a lot of people.
Oh, it was insane.
You had to fight
these
for
guys,
it back
these
then.
these guys were so good, and ProTech was kind enough to build me a ski, and their ski was awesome, but it was just the skill level was so good. So anyway, I think that gave me a gigantic advantage, like over everybody else, because there were other race team managers, but they didn't race, and there were other guys that were on the board of directors, but they didn't have the kind of insight
absolutely
that I had, and
absolutely.
Anyway, we did really well. 95 was the last year for the Squarenos.
Right.
So which was funny because you'd never think that you'd have this kind of pushback, but we came with this Superjet. I believe this is they have the round nose, and the round nose was originally white and purple. It was in production from 96 to 2008.
Right.
2008, then they switched to basically the same looking
The next
ski.
one. Yep.
Yeah, but
They changed. They went to Rias's race bottom, if I'm not mistaken.
You're
right?
correct. So
Okay.
Christoph Girillo,
Right.
who's an unbelievable
Incredible.
good friend of mine, best French guy I ever met.
I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, he was the one that actually did that and made those modifications. They pushed the pump back,
Right.
put sponsons on the ski, changed some things as far as weight distribution is concerned. And I mean, I have not like you. I don't have as much as you, but I have one of these. I have one of those. I have 3 of those, the newer ones.
No, wait, newer? Yeah.
I haven't bought a 4-stroke yet because, truthfully, I mean, it's like I had, I have a million motorcycles, but you can only ride one at a time. So,
Right.
I love riding the last 2-stroke one. I have it's a 17, I think.
Okay.
And I love it so much. So I'm not really racing anymore.
Sure.
So
No, it's an awesome ski.
I love it. But
No, that's my round nose there on the shelf. I told you about the one Chapin helped me build 20 years ago that I sold to buy my first airplane.
Yeah.
And I regretted it. And that one there, remember Steve Craig?
Yeah, of course.
He painted that for a customer of ours in common, and when he was finished with that, he sold that to me.
Okay, cool.
And so I have a Bill Chapin motor sitting on the shelf that I'm going to put in there and hopefully get back to 60 mile an hour with it. That's my goal.
Shaping. Yeah, you could do a whole segment. You could do 10 segments on just building by
Right?
yourself. You wouldn't need.
My biggest regret is the hundreds and hundreds of lunches that we went to in 05, 6, and 7
Mhm.
that we didn't have footage of the stories when he would share that stuff and be open and candid.
Yeah. Bill probably, in my opinion, I don't know if I would necessarily say he was the greatest jet ski builder, mechanic, tuner ever, but he definitely worked harder than everybody else, probably combined.
I agree with that.
And he passed away here this last year, and I just saw his wife the other night, and I miss Bill a lot.
Right.
Yeah, a lot.
I ran into
But-
her at Jersey Mike's one day, and I was choking up. I'm like trying to talk to her because she's obviously doing
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it's tough to talk to.
Yeah, you never met a guy in your life that you could go from hating to loving so quickly. He was so instrumental, and
Yeah.
they built a lot of really good stuff. So, like, back to the Superjet. So what made the Square Nose so stable and such a great race boat is it traps a lot of water. Where the bond line is, there's a big pocket where the water can be trapped. So that trapping that water stops the thing from laying on its side,
Right.
but it also stops it from like falling over, and which is one of the problems at the Kawasaki, like the Kawasaki 750.
750, yes.
Those things
The
were
narrow
notorious
channel.
for just laying on their side and you
Not
couldn't get
coming
that
up.
coming back up.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
You never had that issue with this ski,
Right.
And that's why it was so amazing in rough water. I mean, the ski just works so good in rough water. But at some point, they decided that they wanted something that turned a little bit more like a Cowie. I mean, I hate to say like a
Sure.
Cowie, but
Sure.
probably the best comparison. So when they came out with this, they reduced the amount of water that was being trapped under the bond line.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's the big difference
Is that the
between the square
primary?
nose and the round nose. Is
I always assumed it was the same bottom.
no, it's not.
Okay,
The
okay.
the depth of the bond line is different, and
Okay.
it definitely traps a lot less water. That's why it turned on its side so much better.
Okay.
Like if you look at all the pictures of Chris and Tara on
Oh,
these,
yeah.
they were all flat
Flat,
turns.
yes,
they
they
just flat
turned
turned them, and they were obviously they were amazing at it. As far as like it took a certain amount of upper body strength to do that,
Right.
and so they were looking for something that was a little bit easier to lean
forgiving.
into.
Okay.
So that's where they came up with this, and then with that, we started getting somewhere right at the end of this and going into that, guys like Chapin and Dan Lamey, who Chapin and Lamey used to work together at PJS. They started developing the rules allowed for modified engines. So you had to use OEM cases,
Correct.
but we could go stroker cranks, we could use aftermarket cylinders, and Dan developed a stroker cylinder that was amazing. I mean,
The 7-port, I have one of those.
Oh, do you?
That was one of Chapin's last motors he's built for me.
Yeah, I wish I had one. I had a million of them, and just through the years they all just went away. But
Right.
they were incredible, and there were guys that were doing 5mm, 6mm, 7mm.
Yeah.
That changed everything for us because
Oh, yeah.
that motor was competitive. You know,
Right.
we could compete with anything that anybody else had.
Especially once they put the power valves on it. It was
Right.
unstoppable.
Yeah, and that was the motors that we were using were the power valve ones.
Right.
They had the Sea-Doo Rave
Yeah.
valves in them. Again, Dan Lamy, you know, got to
Oh,
give
yeah.
him credit where credit's due. He was that was his deal. At first, when we first came out with that engine, it wasn't legal.
Okay.
And I remember we were at a race, and I don't remember where it was at, and they're like, we're getting beat. I mean, our ProTech, you know, the motors that we were using, the modified stock cylinder,
stroke, yeah.
yeah, and even ProTech had their own cylinder for a while. It just wasn't enough to beat the powers that be. John Stevens was working with us at the time, and he's like, we're gonna get DQ'd, but we could, just to see where we stand,
Right.
we could run one of these engines. Yeah, we're gonna get DQ'd. There's no
Right.
question about it.
But at least let's see.
But at least
let's
see.
measure.
So I
That's
said,
cool.
okay, you know, what harm is it? You know,
Right.
let's do it. And I forget who was riding that ski. It was definitely in the McCluggage era. I mean, it just, the thing was off the line, and we just welded everybody. And sure enough, we got DQ'd at the end.
Right.
So we lost the race.
Right.
But we knew then, wow, this motor, if we can somehow find a way to get the rules changed so that we can run these aftermarket, you know, parts, you know, we could actually have a chance of winning the pro class.
Right.
So we did. We lobbied and lobbied and lobbied and lobbied, and we finally were able to, for that following year, get the rules changed. Go back to when the Superjet was first introduced and, you know, allowed to race in IJSBA races, which was like 92.
92, yeah.
And then you go all the way to like pretty much when I left, I guess, in 2002. We won so many championships. It was a good time. You know, a lot of people obviously, you know, helped. There were sponsoring guys, there were right plate intake rate guys, there were prop guys,
Right.
you know, there were a lot of different people along the way that helped. But pretty much, you know, Cowie had their factory team. So Cowie,
Right.
in '97, we're here at World Finals, and like Chris is literally like probably like a son to me. I mean, I would say
Oh, yeah.
he was the closest thing I had to a son in the jet ski world. We have our dealer meeting in Orlando, Florida, and after World Finals, we actually brought in this film crew and filmed the jet ski World Finals and sent it back via satellite to the dealer meeting.
Oh,
so
wow.
that at the dealer meeting, at the main part of the dealer meeting, the dealers could see
Real
what was
time.
happening at World Finals.
That's
And we
incredible.
won a bunch, which was, thank God, because, you know, it wouldn't have been so great if we wouldn't have won so much.
Yeah, right.
But we won ski, we won 785, I think we won 1200. I mean,
Wow.
we won a lot,
Right.
a lot. Blaster, Blaster and HX, so introduction to HX was like, Blaster was so dominant, but HX was a really good ski too.
Right.
I think at that point I'm pretty sure they had Farthing, and he was incredible. So anyway, we're supposed to get on a plane, him and me, in Vegas and fly back to Orlando. Well, he tells me, he says, "Hey, I got to talk to you. He's staying with me in the condos," and I'm like, "Well, what do we need to talk about?" At that point he told me that he had made a deal with. So there was a guy named Darren Headland that was working for us at the time, and he had, behind, you know, closed doors or behind the scene, had made a deal.
For you guys first.
Yeah, he worked for Polaris first.
Okay.
He was a Polaris employee. Then he came to work for us because Polaris, you know, he blew their budget. He blew like 3 years of budget in 1 year. He's a very talented guy, incredibly talented guy. So we had Judge, who was insane.
Right.
We had ProTech, they were amazing. Mike Baker, Matt Warbez. We had Riva.
Right. You had Lamy at the same time?
Laney,
With Headland?
Laney,
I had no
Headland.
idea.
Headland was making pipes.
Right.
So we had like the ultimate like kind of combination.
Right.
And anyway, you know, Chris, you know, Headland convinced Chris to sign a deal with Cowie, and never gave me any pro warning or you know, pre-warning, or, you know, I was blindsided. And again, like I said, I mean, I'd be lying if I told you anything, but Chris was literally like a son to me. So got to fly all night to the dealer meeting, and then I got to get up on stage in front of like 3,000 people and tell them how great everything is.
Right.
And it didn't feel that great to me because even though we had done really good in the races, Chris leaving didn't sit well with me. Didn't sit well with anybody at Yamaha. I was able to control my emotions, and I didn't say anything to anybody until after the dealer meeting was over, and then I told my boss what had happened, and that's how we ended up getting Nicholas Rios. So at that point, ProTech was gone. They wound down. They kind of wound down. They were just focusing on consumers, and we were pretty much started the first what we call the factory team, which was a Riva sponsored team. So it was Riva and Yamaha. We hired Rios, and we had Matsuris, and we still had a lot of good riders. We just, Chris was gone. Right. So I think, and then the next year, I think Matsuris got hired by Cowie too. If you looked at every ski on the starting line for X amount of years, whether it's the pro class, expert class, women's class, whatever, it was all super jets. Right. And then there was a couple sponsored Kawasaki's. Right. So that's how good, this ski really was.
Well, when the round nose came out the next year, Kawasaki didn't even have stand up.
Yeah. So
that was very bizarre. I remember that. That was a big deal.
The sales of stand-ups at that time definitely didn't support the amount of money that we were spending
everybody moved on to the sit-downs. The sit-down market was exploding.
Yeah, sit-downs is where all the sales were, and so like I had many argument with the powers that be at Yamaha about spending money to continue to support stand-ups, and fortunately they listened to me, and we were able to stay in the stand-up game all the way to the very end.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely.
Even though for sure sales did not support. But I think, the kids, and this was always a big deal for me, is runabouts are cool for older people, but there's no you get an 80-mile-an-hour runabout, and I guess, it's fun, for some people that are speed freaks or whatever. But the stand-up is and still is so athletically inclined that the kids are drawn to it, right?
Absolutely.
For us, I always felt that it was important that we can
preserve that.
Yeah, and that we can, we stayed on the stand-up train.
That's awesome.
And we did, and we won a lot. And again, you go back and look at Tara's winnings, or you look at Jammer's winnings, just insane number of stand-up victories. I mean, incredible. And it was all. So, like I said earlier, I left I think 2002 was the year that was my last year. Yeah. And I didn't know this, but we were back at World Headquarters. They were talking, without me being knowledgeable of it, about pulling out of racing altogether because the sales weren't there to support it anymore. Right. And they didn't, it was always an argument. It's always been an argument. How much does sales really influence, how much is racing influence sales? We come to World Finals, and probably a few days before I got here, my boss, who at that time, we at Yamaha moved to Georgia. So I moved to Georgia with my soon-to-be wife, and she wasn't too happy about moving to Georgia. But, I was like, okay, I love Yamaha so much. At the time, I had been there 25 years. Wow. That was my life. And I didn't want to leave. And I got the call that we were pulling out of racing like 2 or 3 days prior to me coming to World Finals.
Oh, wow.
So now I know, like, every year at the end, at World Finals was just the start of the year for me, because that's when we'd start all the rider negotiations, sponsorship negotiations. So everybody's used to coming to me and trying to negotiate their deal, right? Sure. And I'm like, no, that we're not going to race anymore. Right. But yet I can't say anything to any of them because ultimately there's a big race still in front of us. We hadn't raced World Finals yet. It was difficult to kind of keep that news to myself, but I did. I didn't say anything. We raced in that year, 2002, I believe it was 2002. We won every moto in every class, in every pro class there was, except one moto, which was the Pro 1200, and Kawasaki ended up going 2-1, and we went 1-2. So they won that championship, but there were like 11 or 12 pro championships available. We won 11 out of 12. Wow. And I just remember being so overwhelmed with pride
Sure.
because there's a lot of work and a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
years and a lot of people that played a huge part in it.
Right.
We went out, about as good as you could ever go out, I guess.
Right.
Superjet was always the driving force behind it. I'd say if you looked at the lineage of Yamaha and you look at the watercrafts that had the most, probably made the biggest difference,
Right.
Superjet would for sure probably be the number
Oh
one.
yeah, top of the list.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and then Blaster would probably be number 2.
Yep. A Blaster.
Because Blaster definitely had a major changed the way people thought about riding.
Right.
Kind of aggressive sit downs.
And they adopted the Raider case. They were the first ones to adopt the Raider cases, and then that later went into the round nose.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the big.
Yeah.
That was a big upgrade. Everybody was all excited about the cases. 'Cause
Yeah. Yeah, they made a bunch of different motors, right? So we made 650, and then we made 701. We made a 701 single carb, and then a 701 dual carb, and then 760s.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of different versions of those 3 motors: the
Right.
650, 701, and the 760. Everybody sort of had their own opinion of which ones worked best.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they were all, the one thing they all had in common is they were all insanely reliable. And you see, I mean, look at this thing. I don't know what year this one is, but like,
It's a 91.
but still to this day.
Oh, it's cared for.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I have several of those. They're still run just as good as they did when they were new. So
Right.
not a lot to complain about, quite honestly.
Oh yeah. No, I think the most reliable ski I've ever ridden was a 91 650 with a 46 millimeter Mikuni and a Kaufman pipe.
Yeah.
The thing railed, and it would start and go every time.
Yeah, the first race I ever did was back in Florida at the World Cup, and I was on a square nose that Harry Clem from Group K.
Yeah,
built
right up the
it.
street.
Yeah, he built it. It was a single carb, and it was a missile. But we were racing at the Keys. It was just dead flat water. First straight was like a football field.
Oh, everybody left.
And my boat was fast, but
Yeah.
the water was warm and they were finicky jetting wise, and I seized the thing.
Seized it.
Yeah, I seized it. And then Whamilton, I don't know if you know that
I love
name.
Whale, yeah.
Yeah, so he was racing against me. He was racing in my class, and I didn't know much about jet ski racing. I was a motocross guy,
Right.
but so I kind of went wide into the corner, and he just came in underneath me and just put a big hole in the side of my ski.
Oh wow.
So I'm like, okay, I'm going to kill you now.
Right.
Now
It's on. Yeah.
I'm going to kill you. And he's like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. And if you have to get ran over by somebody, I'm the right guy because I can fix jet skis. I'm like, oh, okay. I literally left my ski with him that week because would fly back and forth.
Right.
And he fixed it.
That's awesome.
Perfectly. Yeah, so Whammer's another one. Rick Potts was a guy out here.
Rick, I was just talking about him the other
that
day.
lived out here that helped us
Rick
build
was
some
amazing.
special halls.
He built some amazing stuff.
Race halls, and Hamilton did as well. And like I said, I mean, I don't know if I've missed anybody, but really, truthfully, it was always a group effort. It's hard to get racing people to share with other racing people, and especially jet ski racing people.
Yes,
they
it's
tend to be
secretive.
very secretive. Chapin obviously is in his own stratosphere. For the most part, it was kind of one of the deals I made with everybody is that you guys are in the Yamaha family now.
Right.
And
We're going to share that.
we're going to share.
Right.
You deal with a guy like Tim Judge and a guy like Bill Chapin, and I'm telling you straight up, that's not an easy thing to accomplish because they're extremely territorial.
So I got a question, actually, bringing that up. I did a really big series on the intake tract, laying down, Chris at Pro Watercraft makes a stuffer now.
Mm-hmm.
We used to Bondo those. Mm-hmm. And I know Chapin made an aluminum insert in the 90s for the Superjet. Did you guys ever Bondo or fiberglass the intake tracks? That's what I figured that had to have happened, but I never knew for a fact.
We had a shop here in Havasu.
Right. I bought a house here.
Okay.
You guys were still here. So was Kawasaki.
Yeah.
We moved here 6 months later. Kawasaki and Yamaha both left.
Right. Tara's husband, Darren Crisby, he worked there. John Stevens worked there.
Okay.
Scott Watkins managed the place. I mean, I remember one year with the Raider, Tommy Bonacci and me with a skill saw and multiple planks of like cedar wood.
Right.
Carving
Sure.
sponsons out with a skill saw. We literally shaped them with a skill saw. And so we did a lot of stuff here. A lot of Japanese teams came here and stayed, and there was a lot of development, pump diameter, all that stuff plays a huge role in how fast the ski goes,
right.
How well it hooks up. You know, that's why I always said, like, a guy like Chapin, you know, because he was always kind of cutting edge when it came to that kind of stuff. He was smart when it came to the combinations. Like, if you went with a, you know, bigger diameter pump cavity, well, then you basically had killer bottom, you know, torque, but not much top speed.
Right.
So then they would try to make up for that by going smaller on the diameter of the pump, or sometimes the thrust nozzle, whatever.
Right.
And so it's a multitude of combinations
Right.
that you can come up with to try to find the right setup. You know, we would go to certain races and we would put more of a high speed setup in. Some where speed wasn't a factor,
Right.
we went with more hookup and more bottom.
Okay.
And we could also do the same thing with the engines. We could make the engines, you know, more high revving or
Right.
less, you know, bit easier to ride. I was fortunate in my life because I got the chance to ride a bunch of different people's super jets. I always kind of like the more mellow ones. You get a really super fast ski like a Headland ski or a Tim Judd ski. Yeah, you get to the first turn first, but by the time you're, you know, two laps into the race, man,
exactly.
your tongue's dragging and you can hardly hang on.
Right.
That's the thing about stand-ups. That's the thing I always love so much about them, is that you really do have to find the right combination of stuff. World Finals has always also been so special in the sense that most of the teams will come here early and they'll test and test and test. So
Right.
like we would be down at Body Beach a lot of times, you know, till dark. We'd be over there at daybreak. Nobody could ever beat Canamori and Chapin to Body Beach. They would always get there before
Yes,
everybody else.
before dawn.
Yeah, before dawn. We would get there and be there pretty much all day testing various setups, you know, ultimately trying to come up with the right combination of stuff to, you know, to be able to do the best that we could at the races. If you have any other questions, I mean,
I was curious, like you said, the Superjet was available before it was allowed to be for sale. I know the Kawasaki, there was a threat there with the patent?
Yeah.
There were some issues there in releasing
yeah,
the Superjet?
yeah.
Because the Superjet with the rear exhaust and the square motor, the better port timing, there were so many things that Mikuni SVN carb versus the round body carbs. There were so many things that was innovative with the ski.
Yeah.
Even in '91 when it finally came out, it was still ahead of its time.
I know Clayton Jacobson Jr. quite well.
Okay.
He actually raced the Superjet. And I've met his father.
Right.
And I know that Yamaha and Kawasaki both had many a meeting with him. I don't really know the details, truthfully, about what happened behind the scenes and the patents and whatnot that they had to overcome. But thank God they did it right. Whatever Jacobson got, he deserved.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank God that Yamaha had the huevos to come out with their own stand-up, because I am a stand-up. If you haven't caught on to this yet, there's not too many humans on earth that love stand-ups more than me. But yeah, maybe you. You know, Yamaha coming out with a stand-up probably forced the opening of the IJSBA. I don't know if the IJSBA would have ever opened its doors to other manufacturers without the Superjet, because I really feel like the Superjet was the hot water tour, and the Superjet was a big reason.
The turning moment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
it really was. After that, obviously, you know, all the other manufacturers got involved, and the sport grew. It's kind of funny looking at the sport now, because I'm still super involved. The vehicle of choice by far is that vehicle right here. So it's this ski right here is the ski of choice for all of these guys that are just getting into the sport and getting into racing, and it doesn't take much to make one of these really competitive.
I agree with you.
I put a pipe on my ski because I was trying to make Chapin happy. He told me to put it in the trash can. But Chapin built a stand-up for my daughter.
Okay.
And she's got a 14, I think it's a black one. You know, in the girls' class, they can't run pipes.
Right.
So they dried a stock pipe out.
Sure.
But like I rode it the other day. I hadn't really ridden it, and I was like, wow, this thing is really good. I mean, it's super easy to ride. Smooth.
Very smooth, yeah.
So you see these kids riding these things, just railing on these
Right.
skis. Yamaha, Christoph, Nicholas, you know, the whole evolution, pretty amazing. This, you have the 4-stroke, and of course, you know, for Yamaha to be able to sell these forever, they were having to use clean credits. if you produce a certain amount of really super ultra clean stuff, you can bring in a certain very minute amount of dirtier
strokes,
stuff.
right?
Yeah, Superjet didn't have any sort of emissions,
right?
Yeah, so it was as dirty as it
dirty,
gets.
yeah.
And then, but their outboard motors. Remember that these are made. The motors are made at the same manufacturing facility as the outboard motors.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So, and you know how good Yamaha outboard motors are, and
Right.
they sell a lot of them. They were able to bring in Superjets because of
With
the
their
credits.
really?
Yeah, for a number of years, but then that ran out in 19.
Right.
And so, Yamaha really had no choice. But if they're going to stay in stand-ups, they had to come with a four-stroke. So they didn't want to build, I wasn't there, this is speculation on my part,
Sure.
but I think that they didn't want to build something as big and as heavy as
Correct.
the Cowie, the 15
I've heard that, yes. Because everybody complained about the Kawasaki had lost its fun factor.
Yeah.
It's not nimble and playful.
Yeah, it's a hell of a good race ski, though.
Absolutely.
I will say that ski is a really good race ski. And you see all these guys running all these aftermarket hulls, they all use that Cowie motor.
Right.
So that 15F motor is the motor of choice for everybody. But Yamaha wanted to come in like at a different CC level and lighter and more nimble, and so they worked with a Commander.
Right.
Matsuris was there. They came with this boat, and I don't own one, Jim, but I
don't either. This is borrowed.
I definitely think the people that I do know, I've ridden them several of them.
Yeah.
I do think that's a great ski. It's reliable, right?
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
way faster than that. Forever, those skis were the only skis that came out of Japan. So if you look at most of these, you'll see they'll have a sticker on it somewhere that says "Made in Japan."
Right.
These were the only skis that were all made in Japan.
Really?
Yeah. Everything else that Yamaha made back to like the mid to early 90s has been made in the United States, and they're made in a place called Noonan, Georgia.
Okay.
They have a manufacturing facility there, but the Superjet always came from Japan.
Okay.
They hand laid them. They're fiberglass. They're not SMC. They were expensive because they were made in Japan. That ski actually is made in Noonan.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They were able to fit that into the manufacturing facility, and I don't know. Maybe someday I'll get one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for watching, you guys. Have a great day.